our law enforcement to have the tools necessary to keep our community safe and deport people who shouldn't be here and who are sex offenders and are posing a great risk to our communities. I had the chance to meet with a family whose daughter was assaulted by an illegal immigrant. She was 16 years old. She was babysitting a 2-year-old at the time, and I never want to have to face another parent or family and say, I'm sorry, we could have done more with our policy to help make sure this didn't happen in the future. So that's why I've introduced the Be On Act to help make sure we're keeping our community safe. As I mentioned, the Biden administration has admitted now that they're not able to track people. I asked the acting director of ICE several months ago if they could track people. They can't communicate with CBP after people are released into our country. CBP barely has the tools necessary to process people. And they said to us specifically, there are policies that could help them make sure they're keeping our borders secure, while at the same time we need to be talking about legal immigration reform. I want to be very clear, I think we should be focused on disincentivizing illegal immigration and incentivizing legal immigration and making the process work better for coming here the right way. And I think that the first step, though, needs to be making sure that our border is secure. So we need to make sure the wall is finished. We need to make sure Title 42 is in place permanently. That's an ask that came directly from the agents at the border to make sure that they can quickly process people who come here illegally and return them to Mexico quickly. And then we need to end catch and release. We know that's happening. We tried to ask the Secretary Mayorkas, questions. He dodged those questions in committee. We submitted more questions after those committee hearings, and it was months before we even got responses, and those responses did not answer our questions. But we didn't get answers to our questions until documents were leaked from the Department of Homeland Security. That is not how government should run. We should be able to effectively make appropriation decisions to fund these departments as they are needed, because our safety and security is absolutely at stake. So that has been an absolute priority for me. I serve on the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee, and so we are trying to make sure that we are asking those questions and holding people accountable to make sure we're going to keep you safe. Speaking of safety and security, we know our veterans obviously fought for our country. Many people are still fighting for our country and our freedom. So at this time, I'd like everyone who's able to stand, and we're going to take a moment to recognize this Veterans Day on the 11th hour of the 11th day. Do we have any veterans in the room today? Thank you for your service. I think the fight for freedom is very, very important. Speaking of an important fight, I think the fight for responsible spending is alive and well in Washington, D.C. right now. We've seen a tax and spending spree like never before. We're approaching $7 trillion in spending this year. Some of the things that I think are wasteful provisions that I wanted to point out today, and we're happy to get a big list for you if you want a bigger list, but a couple things that I think are important to highlight. $700 million to people who are behind bars, checks to prisoners, $700 million there. $250 billion to states that can't manage their budgets. The state of Iowa has a good budget process in place, thanks to our representatives and senators who are making sure that we're being responsible with those resources. But instead, we're sending Iowa taxpayer money to states that can't manage their budgets and states that can't live within their means. So we've literally been spending trillions of dollars. Right now, the Democrats in Congress, in control of Congress, and the White House and the Senate are arguing over how many trillions of dollars to spend. That's irresponsible, and it's certainly not living in reality. The credit card in this country is due right now. We need to make sure we're not just searching for the couch cushions, but through the couch cushions for those nickels and dimes, we're actually being responsible with reining in out of control spending and really thinking about the future. I think about my kids. They're 10 and 8 years old, and they work hard to earn their money. My oldest has been scooping dog stuff in a yard, and he works hard to make his money, and he earns that money. And he comes to me and he says, I've spent all my money, Mom, I need more. I say, that's it, you're cut off, you go do more of that scooping. Sometimes I feel like we're doing that in Washington, D.C., but I think it's an important lesson to learn that really we need to be living within our means, and I'm trying to make sure my 10-year-old understands that, and I'm certainly trying to make sure my colleagues in Washington, D.C. also understand that. We've been sounding the alarm on all of this excessive spending for months. I had the opportunity as a member of the Budget Committee to ask the Acting Director of Office of Management and Budget when they presented their budget, are you accounting for inflation in any of the projections that you're making, any of the budget projections? And they did not. And that was back in May. And as we know, yesterday the headlines came out, we are seeing the highest inflation in 30 years. That is impacting the price of everyday goods and items, obviously huge supply chain impacts, but energy bills are about to go up. We've already been warned by Mid-American that those prices could go up anywhere from 46 to 96%. And we better hope that we don't have a really bad winter, because it's going to affect Iowa's pocketbooks when we're all paying to heat our homes. And then just the gas tank. I had a veteran this morning. I was at the Hy-Vee in Decorah as they were getting the free breakfast this morning, and he told me it was twice as expensive, literally 2 times as much to fill up his gas tank as a year ago. I think that's striking, and you talk about limiting opportunities for transportation for work, for travel, visiting people's families. That is not the direction we should be going. We should be focusing on energy policies that help make us energy independent. President Biden's response to those increased prices was to ask OPEC to produce more oil after cutting off our resources here at home. We have biofuels here, which are a great opportunity to help not only reduce our carbon footprint, but a ready solution to help drive the cost of gas prices down. E15 works in every vehicle that's 2001 or newer, I believe is the year. So ultimately, we have solutions that are ready to go, and the Biden administration is turning a blind eye to those, and that is directly affecting your buying power and your bottom line. The bottom line is that life is less affordable right now under this administration and under the policies coming out of the Democrats in control of Congress right now. My goal is to make sure your paycheck goes as far as it can every single month. The tax dollars that you're sending in are used wisely, not on backwards priorities that are pie in the sky ideas when we have so many challenges facing this country right now. So that is what I've been trying to do out in Washington, D.C., advocate for turning that spending spigot on, respecting taxpayers in the process, and putting what is right for this district first. My goal was to make sure I'm standing up against policies that are wrong and working together to find common ground when I can on policies that are right for this district, and then deliver solutions coming out of that for you in the first district. And we've done that with a lot of the bipartisan work, and I think that it is important because there is a lot of division in Washington, D.C. right now. There is a lot of bipartisan work that is happening in Washington. I've introduced over 200 bills, and dozens of those are bipartisan, introduced or co-sponsored as well. Some of those that I think are very impactful to rural areas, increased access to child care, focused on trying to figure out ways to let economic development dollars go to actually help build child care centers in places that need them, so a really targeted investment there. And then access to telehealth as well. We know telehealth usage has increased dramatically over the last year and a half. I met with our federally qualified health center folks, and they told me they had seen a 750% increase in the use of telehealth. And so that is obviously something that more and more people are trying to utilize for those medical visits. So trying to make sure that there is parity for billing so that our medical professionals can continue to offer that service is absolutely critical. And then a bill that I worked on with Congresswoman Axne from Iowa's 3rd District. She was the lead Democrat, I was the lead Republican on this bill, but it was the Sergeant Ketchum Rural Veterans Mental Health Act. I was in President Biden's office when he signed that bill, and he called Sergeant Ketchum's mother to tell her about the bill. But the story of Sergeant Ketchum is absolutely heartbreaking, and on this Veterans Day, I think I want to make it very clear. I hope that no veteran ever has to feel like they have nowhere to go and they can't get the services that they need. In this bill specifically, Sergeant Ketchum served our country 2 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, came back home suffering PTSD. And he went to go seek help at a VA center and was turned away. And later that day, he took his own life. And that's, again, something that should never happen. So the Sergeant Ketchum bill is named in his honor to try to make sure that no other veteran ever has to experience that. We want to make sure that the VA has a very clear set of guidelines on how they are triaging and deciding what treatments our veterans need mental health-wise, and also that access exists no matter where your zip code is. So that's a really important bill. And then another issue I've been focused a lot on is disaster preparedness. We've had a lot of natural disasters here in Iowa, no stranger to those. And while we can't control the weather, we can control some of the things we're doing to be proactive about being ready to handle the next round of natural disasters. Obviously, we have the derecho, which caused a huge economic impact and a lot of damage, uprooted people's lives and livelihoods for quite some time. We still have people who are not back in their homes in the path of derecho. And then you look at the flooding that we experience here in Iowa as well. Making sure we're making proactive investments in those areas is crucial. So we've been working to make sure that we are ready across the aisle on those issues. And I hosted a bipartisan member briefing with the American Flood Coalition, worked with the Iowa Flood Center on trying to make sure all of my fellow colleagues understand Risk Rating 2.0, which is the new flood insurance system that just rolled out about a month ago. It's designed to be more responsive to the actual risk of an individual property and making sure that there's more parity there in terms of what people are paying for their premiums there. So updated flood maps are also important. You talk about economic development. We want to make sure people are, if they're taking that risk, they know what that risk actually is before they put up a business or a home in an area that could be impacted negatively by a natural disaster. So again, this is about looking forward. Obviously, we know that there were some issues in how FEMA responded to the derecho and the natural disaster there. We had an incredible amount of claims that were denied. Our office has been working to try to make the process more streamlined so that people who are submitting applications for aid understand what makes a good application. Number one, what are they actually looking for? And number two, how can we refine that process going forward so that folks know if there is an appeal process available and that they can try to go back if they're denied the first time. So those are some of the issues that I have been prioritizing in our office in Washington, D.C. and back here in the district as well. And I look forward to continuing to work on priorities that we hear about today as well. And that's why I'm here, is to hear what's on your mind. But ultimately, the key takeaway for me in the first 11 months is we have seen a drastic push towards expanding the size and the scope of government in your lives every day. And I want to make sure that your taxpayer dollars are spent efficiently, and we've got to turn this spending spigot off. We need to come back to basics on spending, and ultimately, when I look at how that process has played out this year, Democrats in Congress are not respecting their paycheck. And that, I think, is not what I'm hearing from Iowans that they want. They want the government to get out of their way so they can live their lives and continue to have that freedom. So we're going to work hard to make sure that life is better and more affordable, and you pay as little tax as possible into the federal government. We have 3 offices in the district, one in Cedar Rapids, one in Waterloo, and one in Dubuque. And we are in the business of customer service, as I mentioned off the top. So if you have issues related to the IRS, we deal with a lot of issues with the IRS, visas and passports, FEMA applications, should you experience a natural disaster, veterans benefits. We just talked with a veteran this morning whose dad didn't get his medals after his service, so those are issues that we can help you with, as well as Social Security as well. So if you have any challenges with those, please reach out to our office. We're happy to help work on those. So with that, I will be happy to take your questions today. Just how we're going to do this, I just ask you raise your hand and say who you are and where you're from, so we can make sure everybody knows who's talking, and then speak up. We're going to forego the mic since this is a small room and I think everybody can hear each other just fine, but I want to get to as many questions as I can today. So with that, take your questions.
Great.
My name is Scott. I'm from Cresco.
Okay.
First of all, kudos on showing up for every single vote this year. I did a little history checking, and if you're a representative, it's good to be represented. You recently had a very big vote on Friday on the infrastructure bill. And if I'm not mistaken, when you were in the Iowa legislature, you were chair of the infrastructure committee?
Yes.
Why would you vote against $5 billion to come into the state when we are dead last in the nation for repairing roads, bridges, our public transportation systems, airports, so on and so forth.
Absolutely happy to answer that question. Thanks for coming out today, Scott. Infrastructure investment is important in Iowa, and Iowans, this is my 11th in-person town hall, not to mention obviously all the feedback we get into our office, but Iowans want targeted investments in infrastructure, things like roads and bridges, our lock and dam system, and broadband, which I think is important. I talked about the importance of telehealth as well. All of those areas are priority areas, but let's be clear, this infrastructure bill on Friday was directly tied to the Build Back Better plan and was held hostage as a result. So when you look at that combined spending package and the way that the Democrats tried to move forward in Congress with both of those bills, that in my mind was an egregious expense and didn't do enough to directly target that spending to infrastructure. So it's the totality of the parts that I think is the biggest worry in my mind. Only $110 billion of that bill actually went to roads and bridges. $66 billion to rail, $91.2 billion to transit, $7.5 billion for electric charging stations. All of those things in new spending were in addition to the existing authorized.
So did you want to spend more? Did you want to spend more on these things?
There's existing authorizations in that bill that were about half of the total cost of that bill. But when you looked at the additional new spending in that bill, that was problematic to me in conjunction with all of the spending on the Build Back Better plan.
Which part of it was problematic?
Right now, the Build Back Better plan, they're arguing over how many trillions of dollars to spend. And it is directly tied to the infrastructure bill back in August, and we know that. So that is why I made the decision to vote against that infrastructure bill, because ultimately it is not about targeted infrastructure. I have had a number of conversations as well with our governor about the additional money that's in our coffers right now here in Iowa, and obviously our current representatives are here as well today, but they are already talking about how to use that money to target infrastructure needs within our state as well, with a lot of money that's sitting here right now. So when you look at all of those things as a whole and being responsible with spending, I think most Iowans would agree, yes, we want to make targeted investments in infrastructure. That's why I've prioritized as well, coming out of our office, projects that would do exactly that through community project funding requests. I've submitted community project funding requests for our lock and dam system. I secured $5 million for the Port of Dubuque specifically for infrastructure investment. I secured money for the lock and dam number 10 at Guttenberg to make sure that they can put new miter doors on and upgrade that technology as well. So we have been working to make targeted investments and secure those investments for the First District in a responsible way. And this bill did not do that. This bill disrespected taxpayers.
But they separated the bills.
Next question.
I'm sorry, Laura. They separated the Build Back Better from this infrastructure bill. Because you keep saying it's tied to it, but they separated it, and this is a separate vote. I mean, Grassley even voted it.
If you looked at the vote on Friday,
I did.
It was directly tied to the Build Back Better rule and the debate on that rule, and
right.
And the back rooms were made.
I have it.
In order to, I'm happy to answer your question, but I'm just telling you the reality of the situation on Friday and the last 3 months since August, when this whole process started, this backwards process for budget reconciliation started, by spending trillions of dollars that we don't have and setting those targets before they actually talked about the policy. That's the wrong way to govern. It's not responsible, and frankly, when you look at the trillions of dollars that we don't have, those bills were passed without the correct budget office estimates. You look at the infrastructure bill and the number of CBO flags on what's not necessarily paid for in that bill, that should be a red flag for everybody in this room.
Right, I absolutely agree that there's some things in there that I was not real happy with. But right now, from 2015 to 2026, in Trump's bill, it was $1.15 billion for construction projects in Iowa. This one would bring it up to $3.4 billion, and it is specific. $482 million to repair bridges, $638 million to improve our water infrastructure. I'm reading it off of here. $300 million for public transportation, $120 million to upgrade airports, and at least $100 million to expand broadband in the state, which in Howard County in particular, if you know, like Lime Springs and our kids, they can't get online, and right now we're facing a huge COVID surge again, and if they go hybrid again, those kids are left out yet again. There has to be a way to make this happen, and when they separated it, I was happy, because there are some things on the other side that I wasn't real happy with either. So I mean, we've got Grassley voting for it, so I would assume, like, he's been there the longest. I would assume, that that would be something that you would vote for when you could talk to him, and he knows about the state and how it works, and it was really not very happy that you voted against it.
Well, I think that there is a good opportunity going forward. Obviously, this one is moving forward, but I think what I heard from Iowans again was that they wanted targeted investments and being responsible with that spending. And so,
Right.
In my statement that I put out about that vote specifically, I referred to about half the bill, which I agreed with, and I think
Right.
does do those investments, and I think would have been the right move. But again, these bills were tied together directly, and that was the entire rhetoric coming out of Nancy Pelosi and the leadership in the Democrat caucus right now. That was made clear last week by the Progressive Caucus as well. And those deals were made behind closed doors and disrespected the transparency through the entire process. The budget reconciliation hearing was held virtually on a Saturday on 2 days' notice. And I think when you're talking about spending trillions and trillions of taxpayer dollar, the least we can do is make sure we're being responsible with knowing exactly how much is being spent and the impact on people's lives. That should be the absolute bare minimum
Right.
with this kind of spending.
I don't know.
Okay, next question. You said you had some questions. Okay, go ahead.
Eric Bywell, Cresco. January 6th, political prisoners are being held in D.C., tortured, neglected, denied food and water and medical treatment, human rights are being violated. Margaret Taylor Greene visited them and is appalled. What are you doing to free these folks? And it's just off the map.
Eric, thank you for your question. The first thing I want to say about the people involved with January 6th on either side, I was there that day and I experienced it myself, and people who broke the law need to be held accountable if they broke the law that day, regardless of what side of the aisle they are on, where they were from in our country, or their background. And I feel very passionately about that. If you break our country's laws, you should be held accountable. If people are being held for the wrong reasons, I absolutely think we need to make sure we're shining a light on that. But we know that most of the people who've been held have been arrested as a result of investigations that have come out of the Department of Justice and Capitol Police, as well as Metropolitan Police who were there that day. So obviously, if people are being wrongly held, that's of grave concern. As American people, we obviously don't want people who did not commit crimes to be held for the wrong reasons. And if that's the case, then I would encourage people to reach out to our office if they have concerns about that. Specifically, I've had constituents reach out to me, about January 6th and wanting to make sure we do get answers for what happened that day on both sides of that issue, right? Both the people who perpetrated and the people who maybe were involved or were assumed to be involved in the wrong way, I guess I would say. So I think it's important that we get those answers in a nonpartisan way. The commission that's moving forward right now is extremely hyperpartisan, and I don't think that's the right way to get these answers. These agencies had started their investigations months ago. We know, again, about 600 people have been arrested, and many of those cases have moved through the court system, and people have gotten justice, or people have been exonerated. And we need to let that process play out, and I trust in our judicial system to make sure that we can continue to do that and provide people with a fair trial as well. Yep.
I'm Sylvia. On your issues of safety and safeguarding the country from illegal immigrants and illegal trafficking, sex trafficking, which is horrible, and I agree with that. How do you reconcile your ideas about that with the fact that Paul Gosar is attacking Senator Ocasio-Cortez and Matt Gaetz is trafficking children? Don't we need to clean the house first?
Well, I condemn any hateful rhetoric, whatever side of the aisle it's coming from. I've condemned several remarks, and I think that people do need to be held account to their remarks. That's why I'm here talking with all of you today, so that you can ask me these questions. I don't filter questions clearly. I call on anyone, right? And I think that that's important, that we all have to do better, and I clearly am not operating that way for a reason. And if people, again, broke the laws of this country, they need to be held accountable, and I firmly believe that. What I think is important, and obviously, we talk about safety and security in our communities, and And I believe in letting the justice system process play out as well. I mean, if the cases are made against people in this country with evidence, and they can bring a compelling case, we obviously have a system that's built on innocent until proven guilty, and I also believe that. But I do have to be very clear, I condemn hateful speech, no matter which side of the aisle it's on, and very clearly my colleague overstepped some lines in his statements.
Yes, but the evidence is clear, and why isn't the Republican Party moving forward to prosecute and to punish these people in your own party that are doing this?
Well, I've been very public about my statements on folks who have said things that were inappropriate. I condemned my colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene's statements earlier this year. I didn't think that those were appropriate, and I said so at a forum publicly, and I'm saying it again today. I think it's very important that we speak up about things that we don't agree with. And I also believe it's important, though, that until charges are filed or until someone's actually convicted of something, that we don't be so quick to have a cancel culture in this country. People's reputations long-term are at stake, whether that's a member of Congress or a member of this community here in Cresco. People's reputations can be destroyed in one day, even if they're exonerated later. So I just think it's important, and I'm absolutely 100% ready to hold someone accountable if they did something wrong. And I think I want to be very clear about that, whether it was on January 6th, whether it was in a different situation. I think that is what we would expect of our law enforcement to do the investigation they need to do. That's what you would expect if they were coming after a member of your family, that you were given due process before you were dragged through the mud. And I think that's absolutely critical, but I think there is a balance to be had there on both sides of those issues, and we need to condemn hateful speech and hateful rhetoric, but we need to make sure people are still given the due process under the law.
Why isn't the Republican Party speaking more about this? Because don't the senators in Congress and representatives have to hold a whole higher moral ground? This should be an outrage, and all of the people are not listening to you, obviously. When you refute their actions, they're not paying attention to you.
Well, what I can say is what I'm doing for the 1st District of Iowa, which is going around and talking with you and hearing your concerns, and I appreciate that, and that's why I have been vocal on these issues. That's why I've done 11 in-person town halls, because I believe in that accountability and that transparency in answering your questions. So I think going forward, I hope my colleagues operate more in that frame. I'm not the party, I'm a person here representing you, and I think that's important to note, that I hope we can do better on both sides of the aisle, because it is a tough environment to work in right now, and I think we all agree this country is very divided right now, and I think that we can all do better in terms of the language we're using, whether it's in person, on social media, which as we know can be a very hateful place as well, and I think we need to get back to the day where we realize our words do matter.
Correct. I agree with you wholeheartedly, but you represent the party.
Here.
Thank you.
For us.
Thank you. And
Derek Bible, Cresco, when's the last time the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act was brought up on the House floor? I know the Senate Joni tries to bring it up. Can you bring it up on the floor every morning?
so we are, Eric, thanks again for
Would
bringing
you
that up.
repeat that question? I didn't understand what he said.
He asked about the Born Alive Act and when that was going to be brought up on the floor of the House. The Born Alive Act obviously is it's a bill that would make it so we have to protect those who survive a botched attempt at an abortion. And that bill, it's currently under a discharge petition in the U.S. House, which I have signed to try to get it to come to the floor. Democrats have not supported that discharge petition, and that is the method that we have as a member of the minority party to be able to try to get a bill to the floor. So right now, I think what's very clear is there is a direction that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats have chosen to go, which is the complete opposite, which is abortions on demand until birth.
Nope.
Versus this piece of legislation,
Nope.
which I think
That's
is,
wrong.
a common sense piece of legislation that many Democrats also would support. So I will continue to push for it. I think it's a piece of legislation we absolutely should pass and have moving forward.
What's the numbers to get to the discharge?
We have to get to 218, and I'm not sure where we are right now on that, but the minority party versus the majority party numbers in Congress right now are very slim. But we had one Democrat who voted with us on, for instance, the Hyde protections, which I support, which are taxpayer protections so that taxpayer funds don't go to pay for abortions. We did have one Democrat join with us in the Appropriations Committee on that, but they have taken that out of the appropriations bills for the first time in more than 40 years, which I think is the wrong direction to go. But anyway, we will continue to fight for those protections and try to continue to put pressure on to bring the borderline.
They took the Hyde protections out in this so-called infrastructure bill.
No.
It's out in the appropriations bills, and I
No.
believe they have removed it in several other provisions as well.
No. Hello, Laura, healthcare worker, 40 years, work at OBGYN. You cannot have an abortion on demand. You cannot go into my hospital at 39 weeks and say you don't want to have that baby. I will call you out every single time. I've been doing this my entire life. My entire life is spent doing ultrasounds from 6 weeks up. I am sick and tired of hearing this. Women that have miscarriages, it's called a missed abortion. The word abortion means a baby is leaving. I don't want anybody to get an abortion. But when people have a miscarriage, that terminology is abortion. So when you outlaw, like Texas abortion, the word abortion, when they're going into a hospital and they're having a miscarriage, those women can be held accountable for that and put in jail. I'm tired of that being that shouldn't be a party line thing. That should be a human thing. You can't just walk in and get an abortion just because you want one. I did a patient last year that their twins were fused by a heart. One heart between two babies. At this point, that woman will be forced to carry that. She had to make the horrible decision. I see babies without brains. I see babies with horrible things. And those patients are made to make that decision, and it's horrible, and it's crushing for the rest of their entire life. I wish that you could use different terminology as a woman and understanding what it's like to have that precious child, and other women that go through miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage and maybe have to make that decision over and over again. There's got to be another way to approach this than demonizing the women that are coming in there trying to make a decision that they don't want to make. I don't like fighting about this, and I hate that it puts a division between people just because it's a party line. I'm shaking right now because I'm so angry at that language. Women should not be blamed for things that are happening to them that are beyond their control. Obviously, I don't want people just marching in getting an abortion, but we need to find a way to talk about this and realize that there are people in this country that are suffering because of what's happening in states like Texas, because there's people making these laws that do not understand how this works. I'm sorry, but this is one issue that angers me, and I will argue about it every day. And I know you understand. You've had pregnancies, you've had babies, I have too. I see it every single day in my job. Please, let's sit down and have this conversation between the parties and not say the Democrats want you to go have an abortion at the 39 weeks. Like, please stop saying that.
I think it's important to note, and I appreciate where you're coming from, Laura, and I think ultimately this isn't about Democrats wanting that, but they're allowing it. And that's I think the key for me.
They're
is
not allowing it. It's
why are they
against
allowing
the law.
The policy that they just passed on the House floor allows it, and I think
If there's a problem with the baby.
The key for me is we need to, in my mind, the way we move this issue forward in general for both sides of the aisle, because it is a heated issue, and I understand that there are people who are on both sides of the issue, regardless of party, right?
Right.
You have pro-life Democrats, you have pro-choice Republicans, and
Right.
I understand this is an issue where people are on both sides. I think ultimately it comes down to areas where I think we might be able to agree, and that's why I've supported the Hyde Amendment, for example, which I think
Right.
People may have varying opinions about whether or not you should be able to have an abortion or not, but ultimately should taxpayer dollars go to fund that?
Right, and I can agree with that, and the Hyde Amendment will
that's
stand.
areas where I have tried to, during my time in Congress, focus on that, but we have seen legislation brought to the floor that does allow for unfettered access to that. I think that the majority of Americans agree that there does need to be some sort of an accommodation for a place where there is a viability of a baby, right? And we just
Right.
saw a story on, I saw it on
Yeah,
CNN last
21
night.
weeks,
A
yeah.
21-week-old baby
Yeah.
survived. And to me, you know, that is heartbreaking when I think about
It was born early.
that would be allowed and somebody could make that decision and we could protect life. So I think that you know, there's a lot of conversation we can have, but we need to be cognizant of the fact of what these policies do allow.
Right.
And that's why I think making sure we're very clear about the protections for taxpayers, for example, and the protections on timing are very critical, because right now you've seen bills proposed that do allow for unlimited access.
Right,
So I
or
think
like
all-
taxpayer dollars, but if you, that means a woman on Medicaid that's having a miscarriage can't, which is called an abortion, a spontaneous abortion or a missed abortion, none of that money can be used to help her because that terminology is the word abortion. We need to work on that
Hyde
and
Amendment
fix
does
it.
include provisions for protection for the life of the mother and those instances as well. So that is the policy
Right.
that is in there right now. And so I think that's important to maintain, that we're protecting moms who are
Right.
experiencing a major medical situation. I've had 2 children,
Right.
and I understand my first baby, I almost died. I had to have
Right.
an emergent procedure done to pull my baby out. And I know
Yeah.
what that's like. Childbirth
Right.
is a very dangerous medical condition.
It is.
And I think it's absolutely critical that we continue to have a civil conversation about it, because
Yeah.
I think that's what people deserve in terms of areas of public policy, whether it's abortion or whether it's the border issue. I
Right.
think we all can do better in how we
Right.
talk
We
about
just
it.
need an honest conversation about it.
Yeah.
Amy Gusta from Cresco, and I think we all agree with you that humane border security is important, as well as improved processes for legal immigration, and I would certainly support what you put forward because we need workers.
Definitely.
Drive down Highway 9, we really need workers. But many of those people are on the move through no fault of their own, because of climate change, because of droughts in Costa Rica, or floods in Mexico. And it's not affecting just Central America or just Africa or Iraq or Syria. It's affecting us too, and stormwater runoff that we can't manage. It's affecting the farmers because increased rains and more intense rains in the spring. So my question to you is, beyond wind and biofuels, what would you support for fighting climate change? And I would like to thank you for supporting the Growing Climate Solutions Act. But beyond that, what would you do that would, because those are nice but not sufficient, what would you do to support to fight human-caused climate change?